Thank you. So we're going to talk about the kidneys, and in particular the role of the kidneys in keeping us in balance day to day. So first we'll start off with a question. So I'll ask one of the schools to give me some ideas. What do you think the main role of the kidneys is?
So Hennessy High School, can I get you to turn your microphone on and the teacher ask one of their students to answer that question?
Hi, it's Hennessy College, sorry, we're just working that out.
Yep.
Filters the blood.
Excellent. Excellent. That'll do. And so it filters the blood. So when it filters the blood, what does it do? It takes out
Nitrogenous wastes.
Excellent. And where does the waste go? Into the toilet. That's right. So it goes out in the urine. Okay, fantastic. So that's really, when we think about the kidneys, the first role we think about, filtering the blood to remove waste. So just so everyone's on the same page, I'm just going to show a very simple demonstration about how that occurs. So what we'll do is we'll make up some blood first. And we think of the main component of blood is water. So first we're going to pour into this container some water. And then we're going to add some other things that are in blood. And one other important stuff that's in blood is cells, and they're both red blood cells and white blood cells. We've only got white gravel, but we'll put that in. So that represents that. Also things like platelets. Within blood also we have a lot of dissolved small molecules, including the waste products that are going to come out in the kidney. And these are small molecules, so representing that with some clay, we'll put the clay in. And also we have larger molecules that are proteins. So these blue and green gravel, we'll put that in to represent the protein. And then one other important thing that's in blood, and you can tell that it's in blood because if you taste your blood, it tastes like it, is salt. So we'll pour in a bit of salt and give it a stir. And then we're going to filter it through a filter. And the filter we're going to use is just a kitchen sieve. And that's what the filter in the kidney, which is called a glomerulus, that's what it's like. It's like a sieve. It's just got little holes that allow small molecules and water to pass through. It holds back large molecules. So when we pour the blood through our kidney filter, what happens is all the water comes through, the salt's gone through because it's dissolved, a lot of the waste products, the small clay is dissolved, so it's gone through, but we've held back stuff that we keep in our blood, the large cells, the red cells, the white cells, the proteins, some of the larger molecules. They haven't gone into our bloodstream. They've gone into the filtrate, which is going to become the urine. So in fact, the blood that flows through the kidneys is about 20% of our cardiac output. So every time the heart pumps, about 20% of the blood is going through the kidneys and getting filtered. That's a lot of blood. That means that every minute an adult kidney would make about half a cup of filtrate. So that stuff that we've got in that second container with all the salt and water in it, we're making about half a cup every minute. So just think about that. It doesn't sound like much, but that means that every hour we're making about 7.5 litres per hour. So is anyone here making 7.5 litres of urine per hour? Needing to go to the toilet to pass 7.5 litres? Of course not. I mean, you wouldn't be here, and I wouldn't be here giving you the lecture if I had to wee 7.5 litres an hour. I'd be in the toilet at the moment. And I'd be in the toilet with a bottle of water because I'd be drinking to keep up with what I'm losing. Because that means that in a day you'd be passing 180 litres of urine. So we filter 180 litres per day, but we don't make that much urine. And that's because the other part of the nephron, someone said the nephron was the unit and the glomerulus is the filter. But the other part of the nephron is the tubule. So in this diagram you can see the glomerulus at the top, and the blood is coming into the glomerulus and going out again. So the glomerulus is just a little sac that contains tiny little blood vessels. And those little blood vessels, a bit more complex than the kitchen sieve, but mostly similar to that. They've got little holes in the wall of the blood vessels, so water and small molecules and salts goes out and goes into the space around the glomerulus, and then it passes down the tubules. And then you can see that each glomerulus has got a squiggly tubule attached to it, and then the tubules all join up in the collecting duct with different tubules coming together, and that passes the urine. So mainly what we're going to talk about today is the function of the tubules in keeping us balanced in terms of water and salt. So we don't wee out 180 litres per day because we reabsorb, our tubules reabsorb about 99% of the filtered water. So then, how much urine do you think an average adult will pass per day? Can I ask one of the schools?
Yep. Hennessy College, can you answer that question?
How much urine per day do you think you'd pass?
2 litres?
Yeah, maybe up to 2 litres. So somewhere between 1 and 2, and that's, as you know, about 1% of 180 litres, 1.8 litres. But do you pass the same amount of urine every day?
St Ives High School?
Rebecca? No.
No, and what sort of things would change to determine how much urine you pass in a day?
Dad?
Osmoregulatory systems, such as your salt intake and the amount of water you've had to drink.
Yeah, excellent. So the amount of salt and water that you take in. Anything else? The amount that you're using up. You know, the amount that you might be losing otherwise, the amount that you're sweating. So on a hot day, you might not pass as much urine because you're losing more water by sweat. And sodium, which is the main salt in our blood, more than 95% of that is generally reabsorbed in the tubules as well. So even though it's dissolved in the water and the sodium get reabsorbed in the tubules, so we don't actually end up weeing it all in the toilet. For things to be reabsorbed in the tubules, they need to pass across the wall of the cells that make up the tubules. And those tubules have semi-permeable walls, so they'll let some things through and hold back other things. And that reabsorption and also secretion, some molecules move in the opposite direction into the urine. That occurs by both active and passive transport, or active and passive diffusion across the semi-permeable membranes. The tubule, that long squiggly thing with a little narrow bit down in the bottom of the loop there and then a thicker bit at the end, it's that shape because at different points in the tubule it has different functions. The cells have different functions. So the main picture that we've got there is a slide of a specimen of the kidney that's been stained to show the cells of the tubules. And just at the top of that slide, that little bit that's pointing in there, this sort of little bit of a circle that we can see with all the cells, that's a glomerulus. That's just part of the glomerulus. But the main thing we want to look at are the tubules. And you can see all the rings there, they're all tubules cutting cross-section. And what you can notice is that some tubules look different to others. Some have big fat cells with big fat nuclei, and some are skinnier and flatter cells. And that's because those sections are taken from different parts of the tubule. So the big fat ones are taken from the proximal tubule that's up near the glomerulus. And they're bigger cells because they're more active. They do a lot of this transport of salt and water. And so they need a lot of energy, they've got a lot of subcellular components within there, and the nuclei are quite big. While those flatter ones are down in the distal, the more towards the end of the nephron, and they don't do as much work, they're not as active. And in between the tubules, the spaces that you can see, that's where the blood flows, so that's where there's little capillaries. So when we talk about reabsorption, we're talking about fluid moving in the direction of the arrows. So moving from out of the tubules into the spaces where the blood is. So we're taking out stuff from the filtrate and putting it back into our bloodstream. So this diagram shows you what the proximal tubule might look like if you cut it in longitudinal section. And the grey boxes, they represent the cells, individual cells. And in between the grey boxes there, we've got the filtrate that's come down from the glomerulus, which has got water in it, which has got sodium in it, glucose, other things that are filtered at the glomerulus. And on the other side is the blood in the spaces. So if we reabsorb most of our sodium, it's got to move from the filtrate into the blood. But the wall of the tubule is only semi-permeable and doesn't let a lot of sodium in unless there are specific portals, specific windows, doors, corridors for the sodium to move through. And the sodium will also only move across a semi-permeable membrane if there's a diffusion force, something that's either driving it or pulling it. So one of the ways that sodium is pulled across is because on the other side of the tubule we've got a pump. And this is literally a pump, which is pumping out of the cell sodium and pumping into the cell potassium. But every time it pumps out 3 sodium, it only puts in 2 potassiums. And so you get 3 positive ions coming out, but only 2 positive ions going in. So inside of the cell becomes negative. So then we have an electrical gradient. So that will want to drag in more positive ions. So some of the sodium that's in the filtrate will want to be dragged into the cell. But it can only do that if there's a pathway for it to go through. And that's a transporting pathway or a channel. And there are different sorts of channels in different parts of the tubule. But in the proximal tubule there's these channels that allow sodium to come in. And as the sodium comes in, it takes with it glucose. So the glucose is also moving into the cell, it's sort of dragging along, it's going along with the sodium. And the sodium goes out by the pump, and also glucose will go out through its own channel to the other way. So question time. What are these processes? Are they active or passive processes? So firstly, the pump, the sodium and potassium pump, is that active or passive?
Hennessy College, can you answer that question?
Active.
Active, excellent. Because it needs energy. It's pumping against an electrical gradient, it's sort of moving things out and other things in, but it's not in balance. So that requires energy. And what about the other side, the sodium and glucose channel? Active or passive? The glucose moving in, does that come in passively?
It's passive because it's going along the gradient that was created.
Yeah, exactly. So the sodium's moving along the gradient that's been created and it's taking with the glucose, and then glucose going out the other direction is also passive. So you have this combination of both active and passive diffusion and different parts of the nephron. Okay? So that's a little bit about how we reabsorb sodium and other electrolytes and other things like glucose and other minerals that we reabsorb in the kidney, things like phosphate, magnesium, calcium. All these minerals and molecules are filtered at the glomerulus, but we reabsorb them in the tubules. And along with those, we reabsorb a lot of water, and 99% of our filtered water. But we don't think about that. We don't tell our kidneys to do it. It does it automatically. So apart from controlling how much we urinate, which our kidneys do, how else do we day to day, again mostly automatically, control the water balance of our body?
Drink more water.
We drink.
And hormones.
And hormones, yeah. And how do we know how much we should drink?
When we feel thirsty, we respond. Our body goes off the
Dad,
reactive with
sorry, do you want to use bigger voice?
I can hear that, that's all right. So he said that we feel thirsty. When we need more water, we feel thirsty. And that's right. So the ways that we maintain our water balance without really thinking about it is by thirst, by drinking, and by urination. And those 3 things together sound fairly simple, but of course there's a complex pathway linking them together. And why we maintain our water balance is to maintain the osmotic pressure outside and inside of our cells fairly stable. And that's the osmolarity of our blood. And the osmolarity is the concentration of our blood, the number of particles that are in the volume, in a given volume is the osmolarity. So the amount of particles within our blood, particularly sodium, makes up the osmolarity of our blood, how concentrated it is. And because that osmolarity is important for maintaining cellular function, our body has a lot of systems to maintain the osmolarity within a fairly narrow range. And that's particularly this talking between the brain and the kidneys. Before we talk more about that, we'll just think about osmolarity and concentration, just so we're all on the same page. So on this picture, A, B and C are 3 different containers. And container A and B have got a litre of water in them, that's the blue, while container C has only got 500 mils of water in it. Container A has 4 molecules in it, and let's say they're sodium. So that means the osmolarity of that container A is 4 osmoles per litre. Okay? So can someone tell me what the osmolarity is of container B? 8. Okay, because there are 8 osmoles in 1 litre. And then Hennessy, what's the osmolarity of container C?
Same.
Same as what?
Container B.
So 8. So someone said 4, but
Yeah.
of course the answer is 8 if we talk per litre. There's 4 per 500 mils, but in the per litre is the units, there's 8. So that's just so that we can think that to change the osmolarity we could do two things. One, we could put in more molecules or take out some molecules, but the other thing we could put in more water or have less water. So on that hot day when we're not, if you're doing school sport, you're exercising, you're sweating a lot, you may not have taken your water bottle with you, you'll start to lose a lot of water. So your water, the volume of blood, the volume drops, so the concentration rises up, so your osmolarity goes up. And that's sensed by part of the brain called the hypothalamus, which is the H on this diagram. So this is an MRI of a child, and it's sort of looking at them down the middle of their brain. And where H is about where their hypothalamus is. And within the hypothalamus there are specialised cells that sense the osmolarity of the blood. And if it notices that the osmolarity is changing out of normal, it sends a signal down to another part of the brain where the star is, the little gland there called the pituitary gland, which you've probably heard of. And the pituitary gland makes a lot of hormones. And one particular hormone it makes is the antidiuretic hormone. An antidiuretic hormone then moves in the bloodstream to the kidneys, and at the kidneys it works at the kidneys to tell the kidneys to reabsorb more water. So the hypothalamus senses our osmolarity is going up because we're getting dry, so it sends a signal to the kidneys to tell the kidneys you've got to reabsorb more water, stop weeing out as much because we need the water. And then the blood osmolarity will return back towards normal, and the pituitary will stop sending out the signal. So antidiuretic hormone, or ADH, so drugs that make us wee are called diuretics. So diuresis is weeing. So this is an antidiuretic hormone, an anti-weeing hormone. It's also got a name of vasopressin, sometimes called that. And it acts at particular cells in the kidney, in the collecting duct. And it's important that it acts there because usually the collecting duct is impermeable to water. So the collecting duct won't allow water to be reabsorbed there unless there's ADH. And the ADH puts those little channels into the collecting duct to allow water to move through. So in the collecting duct, we've got the water in the urinary space, in the filtrate, but the collecting duct's impermeable, so it doesn't pass through the cell unless there's ADH. So ADH is on the other side, coming down from the pituitary in the bloodstream, and it binds to its receptor in the collecting duct. And once it binds to its receptor, it sends a signal to the cell to put these channels into the other side of the tubule. Those channels are pores that allow water through, so they're called aquaporins. And then when the aquaporin's there, the water will come through and be reabsorbed. So that way we can fine-tune how much water is in our bloodstream by using aquaporins and ADH. But it can go wrong, and it usually works very well, but occasionally it will go wrong. Sometimes you might have more ADH than you need, in which case you'll be reabsorbing more water than you need, and you get a syndrome of intoxication. Does anyone know conditions that could cause too much or too active ADH? So dehydration causes you to produce more ADH, but that's appropriate, that's normal, so you won't get water intoxicated in that state. But there are some times that you make too much ADH even though you don't need it, and that's particularly if you've got a problem with your brain, so a brain injury or meningitis, an infection around the brain. And some medications will do that, and some drugs. So that's the reason that you hear occasionally about young people getting sick and occasionally dying at dance parties after using drugs like ecstasy and other stimulants. Because they work in two ways. One, they may increase the amount of ADH being produced, so you hold on to water, but at the same time they make you feel thirsty, they make your mouth dry. So you lose your normal regulation because of those drugs. So you may end up drinking a whole lot more water than you need, and that water goes into the cells, makes them too dilute, the osmolarity drops and the cells swell, and if the cells in your brain swell, it can be fatal. We also see it in patients in hospital who have those brain injuries, brain tumours, cerebral infections, and sometimes even it can come from lungs and lung problems. Diabetes insipidus is the opposite. Diabetes insipidus is when you don't have enough ADH. So diabetes insipidus means you don't pee out 180 litres a day, but people with diabetes insipidus may be peeing 8 litres a day, which is a lot of urine. So their kidneys, their ADH doesn't work. And it can either be because they've got a problem with their brain that it doesn't make enough ADH, or a problem with their kidneys that it doesn't sense the ADH. And the kidney side of it is actually usually a genetic condition, or again can be due to drugs. The genetic condition is usually X-linked, so it's passed from mothers to their sons. And their sons need to drink plenty of water and are going to the toilet all the time. We've learned a lot about these diseases and the normal functioning of the kidneys over the years through science by looking at kidneys under microscope, by doing experiments like scientists used to get a whole long kidney tubule and extract urine from different parts of the tubule to measure what was in there. And then they can see, well, you know, at this part there's a little bit of sodium and this part there's a lot less, so clearly in between that's taken sodium out. And these days we do a lot of the investigation by looking at genes, and by the genes that regulate a lot of those channels that we talked about. And so the group of these boys that have X-linked diabetes insipidus, they don't have that receptor for ADH. And before we had science, we had all different explanations for it. And because it runs in families, you would commonly see it in groups. And there would be, occasionally you would find a village where a lot of the boys had diabetes insipidus. And so you heard stories like, one story that's well known is a myth, that one day an old woman came to the village and was thirsty, had been travelling a long way, and asked for help and asked for a drink of water. And she asked a woman who was busy, and this woman didn't have time to give her a drink and sort of fobbed her off because she was an old gypsy woman. And so then that woman, who was a witch, put a curse on that woman and said, your son will always be thirsty, and his sons, so, and all the sons in your family. And so that was how it was explained before science. We thought this was witchcraft, that these boys, every boy in this family, can't concentrate their urine, are running to the toilet all the time and are always thirsty. So what we've talked about is kidney tubules and how they reabsorb water, sodium, glucose, other minerals and salts. How antidiuretic hormone works and where it comes from. And how the combination of these things maintain the balance in our blood. So my last slide, I just thought I'd introduce some of the research that I'm doing and why I'm interested in it. And what I'm looking at is kidney injury, what happens when the kidneys get damaged, and particularly when the kidneys get damaged if the blood supply to the kidneys is affected. And that can happen in people who are sick, or people who have major operations. And if we look over at the model, as you know, the kidneys are up here at the back of your body, and they receive blood through the aorta, which is the large red blood vessel. It comes out into the arteries, the other red vessels that go out to the kidneys. And if we interrupt the blood there, if we clamp or cut that blood vessel, then no blood will get to the kidney, and then the kidney cells will be under stress or go into shock because of that. So if we come back to my slide, you can see this slide here is again looking at tubules, but you can see they look very damaged compared to the first tubules we saw. We can see some tubules, some of those flat, skinny ones there look pretty normal, except they're filled with stuff. That pink stuff is in the middle of them, because that's all junk. But the other tubules, we can't even see the structure, and the ones that are particularly missing are those big ones, because they're the ones that are most active. They need the most energy, so they drop out of the energy, they get damaged. And so that's what my research is trying to look at ways that we can prevent or lessen that injury, particularly in kidney transplantation.